I was so scared of investing in property, and to a certain extent still am. When I first started to invest in property, I was scared I was going to buy the wrong type of property. I wasn't sure if it was better to buy a house or a flat. I was scared I was going to buy it in the wrong area. I wasn't sure if an area was good or bad or how to tell the difference between the two. I was scared of negotiating with estate agents. I genuinely thought you had to pay what the property had been marketed for and that there was little room for any negotiations. I was scared of the surveyor. I was really worried about the revaluation, especially when I started doing projects in central London. I was scared of finding a tenant who might pass the initial referencing but then stop paying the rent or even start causing damage to the property. Scared, 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 scared. Someone once told me, stop being so scared of the unknown and start being more scared of. I'll come back to this at the end of the video. Please do me a quick favor and hit that subscribe button. It helps me more than you think. I was scared I was going to buy the wrong type of property. I have been on lots of property training courses. They always seem to suggest buying houses over and above flats. So when I started, guess what I decided to buy? A house. I was intrigued to find out which was a better investment, a house or a flat, given I have now invested in both and so realised some of the following points. The houses I purchased in Birmingham were freehold, so there was no service charge and no ground rent. I had more control over any works that I needed to do. Scope. I could further enhance the value of one of the properties I own by adding a basement. Adding basements in Birmingham, I could kickstart a new trend, converting the loft into another bedroom or by adding a rear extension. More desirable from families, and so in my experience I have noticed that they tend to stay longer and therefore I have fewer voids and who are more likely than not to look after the property, although this is not always the case. More desirable in the current market. Due to COVID, property prices have been on fire. People have been looking for houses with more space inside. This did reduce the desirability of apartments in city centres, but the trend is changing back as the pandemic eases. True or false? Houses tend to appreciate more in value than flats. What do you think? Comment down below. I will try and do a video on this, comparing a house I purchased in Birmingham versus a flat I purchased in central London. Please make sure you are subscribed so you get notified when I release that video. Some of the differences I have seen compared to buying flats are as follows. Houses are more expensive to buy when compared to flats in the immediate area, and therefore the amount of money I needed is a lot more in terms of the deposit, stamp duty and refurbishment costs. The maintenance costs are higher as I am now responsible for a roof, the external windows and doors, the gardens and the structure of the building itself. In my experience, flats I have purchased have the following benefits. The demand for flats is higher in city centres given the lack of houses. The yield tends to be higher due to the lower purchase price. There is less maintenance given that you are not directly responsible for the communal areas and for things like the roof. The only issues I've come across with apartments I have purchased include some of the following. There is usually a service charge to pay. This is for the management company to look after the communal areas of the property. There is usually ground rent to pay. This can be anything from £10 per annum all the way up to £500 per annum. I have noticed and experienced firsthand that flats are usually purchased by buy-to-let investors looking to let to young couples, students. The tenancies therefore tend to be shorter when compared with houses. Major works. If the block requires a new roof, windows or doors, these costs are passed on to each leaseholder through a major works notification, which lets them know the overall cost of the works and therefore their share of the costs. Lease extension costs. If the lease falls below 80 years, then I will have to get it extended, which can cost thousands of pounds. On the face of it, it can seem that houses are better investments. However, there are exceptions. For example, in London, houses are very expensive, so the majority of investors buy apartments and therefore it makes sense to buy apartments. Using the B4R model, I've managed to buy nearly 3 times the number of apartments when compared with buying apartments in central London using the traditional model. So flats can be very good investments. You just need to check the ground rent and service charge and also have a look at what else is happening in the immediate area in terms of development. Whether or not you choose to invest in houses or flats will depend on your long-term investment objectives, what investment strategy you decide to follow, where your investment strategy works. I've purchased both houses and flats and I'm in the process of converting houses into flats. I've invested in the Midlands and central London so you can see both sides of the story. People People always say they don't like buying apartments because of the service charge and ground rent, alongside the possibility of major works in the future, which they have no control of. However, what you need to take into account is that a flat is a lot less work when compared to a house, and also the costs of refurbishment are also a lot less. You might receive a major works notification, but in reality, this is no different to you having to do works to your house. It could be argued it's easier with a flat, given that there is a managing agent in place who is likely to have a tendering process for the works and ensure that any work that is carried out by competent contractors. Whether I choose to buy a house or a flat in London or in Birmingham, I make sure I add significant amounts of value to minimize my money left in and make sure I buy based on my investment objectives. When I first started to look for investment properties, my main criteria was the price. I was literally looking for the cheapest houses in Birmingham, and when I viewed them, I had no real idea if the area was good or not. I called the agent, asked if I could view the property, viewed the property, and then thought, what's next? I did this a few times before I realized I was wasting my time, and I was really scared that I was going to buy in a bad area. I knew I was looking for reasonably priced properties in Birmingham, but I also wanted to have working tenants and families in an area that was desirable and in demand. So I went into a letting agent. I said I was looking to invest in the area and had some questions I was hoping they could answer. Which area is in demand currently and why? Is there any development taking place in that area in the near future? Do you manage any properties in the area? What is the rent for a 3-bedroom house in that area? Is that area desirable from working tenants and families? Could you help me find a tenant? How long would it take? What are your tenant find fees and management fees? I would always speak with at least 3 different letting agents in the same area to get a good feel for what they were saying and making sure I was hearing the same messages again and again, which gave me the confidence when selecting the area for investment purposes. I developed an area checklist, and this was off the back of one of my friends asking me why I had decided to invest in a particular area in Birmingham, which I think is a good way to look at it. Imagine your friend asking you the following questions. Why did you decide to invest where you have? And the response I had eventually was, I decided to invest in Birmingham as I was familiar with the area. I decided to focus on Smethwick and Handsworth as I knew houses were in demand from working tenants and families. The yield in these locations was good and there was lots of development taking place. I had spoken with 3 letting agents and they said they had a waiting list of tenants looking in the area, and the area had strong rental demand. Once I completed the checklist, I was less fearful when it came to investing in the area, such as central London. When I first started to put in offers for properties I was interested in, I would usually do this over the phone. I remember my heart would be pounding when I was putting in an offer. These were some of the reactions I had when I first used to put offers in over the phone. Agent: sorry, unfortunately we've had higher offers. Are you able to increase? My usual response on the phone was, let me call you back. Agent: there is no way the vendor would accept that, and I would feel embarrassed to put that offer forward. My response: okay, thanks. Agent: I can put your offer forward, but it's not what the vendor is looking for. I thought you were very keen on the property. I am. I really like it, but only able to offer the said amount. Over time, I decided to stop offering over the phone. When an offer did get rejected, the agent would say, would you like to make a revised offer? And on the phone, I would say, yes, sure. Then they would ask how much, and I usually just offered another £10,000, and any subsequent offers were usually by the same amount. Over time, I decided to develop a framework when it came to negotiating with estate agents. I would never offer on the phone. I would only ever offer over emails. I would make a call to the agent after the viewing and say the following. It works in terms of what we would like to do with it, but only at roughly this level. And I would quote the figure from the negotiation template I'd created. And if the agent said they would put the offer forward, then at that point, I would send a formal email with the initial offer amount, including my offer pack. The offer pack I created has been a game changer, and it makes me look very professional when presenting my offers, as it gives the estate agent everything he needs, again saving them time and effort. If my offer was subsequently rejected by the owner, then I would use the negotiation template to progress to my second offer. Using the negotiation template and offer pack together reduced my fear massively, as now all I had to do was follow a process. Previously, I would spend days coming up with revised offer amounts, and in my own mind, I would be justifying any subsequent increase and trying to justify that to the estate agent. For example, I would say the property needs a lot of work, and the agent would say the pictures and the description said it needed a complete refurbishment, and you knew that when we spoke on the phone when you booked the viewing. I would be like, yeah, but okay, thanks. Now I can use the negotiation template to negotiate the first, second, third, and final offer. When I started to convert 1-bedroom apartments into 2-bedroom apartments using the B4R model I had developed, I was really worried about the end value of the project. I was so scared because when I initially started looking at a project, I was asking the estate agents, what do you think this would be worth as a 2-bedroom apartment? And every agent looked at me confused. They would look back at the apartment and they couldn't understand how I was going to turn it into a 2-bedroom apartment. They said to me that I wasn't adding any square footage, so how could it be worth more? To be honest, at the time I used to agree in principle with them, but in the back of my mind I thought a 2-bedroom apartment in central London costs more than a 1-bedroom apartment. I did develop a criteria checklist when looking for these 1-bedroom apartments that I could convert into 2-bedroom apartments, which helped me massively reduce my fear, as now I knew what I was looking for. I was scared that the apartment wouldn't be worth much more as a 2-bedroom apartment, so the only way to overcome my fear, I realized, was with data. One of the people in my network always says the following: the data is the data. And so I realized if I could get some comparables for 2-bedroom apartments and present those to the surveyor on his visit, then this would reduce my fear of any down valuations, or it would help as much as possible to support my valuation. Everyone always says put together a surveyor pack and meet the surveyor at the property. I do feel like it helps, as it shows I care. I have invested my time to show the surveyor the apartment, explain to them what it was like before, the works I've completed to add value, and can answer any questions they have then and there. I must admit that very often all I would get from the surveyor was a hi, hello, followed by him running around the apartment taking photos and sizes. I would give them the surveyor pack, and often they would say thank you and leave it on the table as they went around the apartment. What I was also trying to understand was the way in which they came to their valuation. I am all about building models, and so I wanted to build a model that I could use again and again to calculate the end valuation of my projects so that I could do more and more projects. I do feel like I've developed a good model when it comes to finding out the end value of my project, which has to a certain extent reduced my fear when it comes to looking at other projects. I was scared of finding a tenant. Not many property investors talk about the problems of property investing. When something used to go wrong when I was working in the city, whether it was for Ernst & Young or an investment bank, the emphasis used to be on what we could learn from our mistakes so that it didn't happen again. In property investing, if you talk about having issues with tenants or managing your properties, then I feel people think that you are not a very good property investor, and it's for that reason people don't really talk about any issues they are having or had. When I first started to invest in Birmingham, I opted for the local agent to provide me with a tenant find service only. I was happy with managing the property myself, as I thought there wasn't that much to it, or much that could go wrong. Even if something did, I could use one of the tradespeople I'd used to help. I lived 2 hours away, and so decided to use a letting agent to find the tenant, as I didn't fancy doing any of the viewings and referencing. I did consider finding a tenant myself and doing the referencing myself, but I was worried that if something went wrong, like the tenant stopped paying the rent or my property was damaged, then what could I do? I decided I was happy to pay a letting agent to provide the tenant and me manage the property. At least if anything went wrong, then hopefully the agent would provide some help. In fact, what did happen to one of the properties I purchased, I had the neighbour from next door come round when I was there, and she wanted the house for her daughter who was expecting at that time. She seemed like a lovely lady, and my instinct was telling me, don't do it, but I did. I did say to the mum that she would need to go down as a guarantor, which she did. The problem was that her daughter stopped paying the rent and then decided to move out. I had to go back in and clear up after she'd left. I did try and get the outstanding rent from her mum, and she said, sorry, I don't have anything. I felt like an idiot and vowed to leave it to the professionals going forward. Found a letting agent that found me a tenant, and also provides me a rent guarantee in the event that the tenant stops paying. How good this guarantee is, I don't know, as I have yet to have to use it, but it gave me peace of mind. Back to what someone told me. Stop being so scared of the unknown and start being more scared of never knowing.